Ok. La salle est en train de se remplir. Je propose que vous commenciez à parler.
Ok, je vais commencer, si vous voulez bien, Vincent.
Ok.
Ok.
Vous pouvez commencer.
Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm François Roux. I'm the advisor here. I'm an advisor here at the Egmont Institute for International Relations. And I'm delighted to moderate this webinar on the EU industrial policy and the post-COVID recovery and resilience strategies. Now, judging by the high number of participants to today's webinar, there seems to be a lot of interest out there for the matter. Many thanks for the presence of all these participants. Many thanks also to the Egmont team for the preparatory work. If you allow me, I would like to start by a word on the context. We know that the COVID pandemic will have a serious contraction effect on the EU economy, but what we do not know is how bad this contraction will be, and nor do we know how long it will last. That's point number one. Point number two, we know that the unprecedented recovery package adopted in July is urgently needed, but uncertainties remain on the timeline for the implementation of the recovery plans. Negotiations between the Council and the Parliament are ongoing as we speak, and the great majority of member states, including Belgium, have not yet presented their national recovery plan. In this context, and based on the Commission's recommendation, the October European Council called for, and I quote, "The EU must pursue an ambitious European industrial policy to make its industry more sustainable, more green, more competitive globally, and more resilient," unquote. Heads of states and governments therefore clearly see the new European industrial policy as a major tool for a lasting and solid recovery. The first theme for our discussion today will be the timeline for the implementation of the recovery plan, what will be the role of the EU institutions and particularly the role of the Commission, and what is expected from member states. The second theme will be the perception from outside of the EU recovery plan, as well as the possible assistance to member states provided by non-EU international institutions such as the OECD. Then, referring to the country I know best, as a third theme, we'll have an exchange of views on what could be the new Belgian industrial priorities. And finally, as theme number 4, and taking advantage of the presence of the State Secretary, we will have a preliminary view on how the Belgian national plan will be drafted. These themes will be introduced by our 4 members of the panel, Mrs. Kerstin Jorna, Director General of DG GROW at the EU Commission, Mr. Juan Yermo, Chief of Staff of the OECD Secretary General, Monsieur Olivier Joris, Executive Manager Europe International of the Federation of Belgian Enterprises, and Mr. Thomas Dermine, Secretary of State responsible for scientific policy, recovery program, and strategic investments. Many thanks to all of you for giving us some of your precious time. We are very grateful for your participation. Before we start, I would like to make a few brief points on procedure. This is a public event and the session will be recorded. The language will be English, and considering the number of participants, may I suggest that all those who want to raise a question to do so by using the chat box, which will be monitored by my colleague, Guillaume van der Loo. I will now ask each of the panelists to intervene shortly, and after this presentation, we will take the questions. Mrs. Jorna, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much. Good afternoon also to my co-panelists. I want to talk about three things: money, policy, and projects. Now, when it comes to money, we have the headline number, 672 billion euro in the recovery and resilience facility to be shared amongst member states. Very novel way of using the money, because we are going to borrow it from the markets as the EU, and we will distribute it to the member states, who will plan it essentially without strings attached to finance the recovery in their countries. Just a little debrief from our first the first 17 billion that we brought to the market, where we tapped the markets recently. They were completely overdrawn. 233 billion euro were actually offered for these, and investors were very keen to buy these bonds, which shows that there is a very strong confidence of investors in Europe. And I think that should be the backdrop to what we're discussing. That's my part on money, and I'm happy to answer more questions on that later. Then I come to policy, because you see, if you want to invest money rather than only spend it, then you need policy and projects. So policy, I mean, the EU policy, the big framework on policy is the Green Deal and the digital decade, so this twin transition. And inside these two, we have the industrial strategy, we have the strategy for the single market, the SME strategies, where these strategies fill in fact, the twin transition. That's the European level. But of course, we expect member states to deliver. And through the RRFs, the resilience, the recovery and resilience facility, the money will actually be with the member states. So we expect member states to do their share. Now, let's look at Belgium. Belgium, the last forecasts give us minus 8.8% GDP, in fact, in 2020, and we're looking at 6.5-ish growth next year. When I look at the situation in Belgium, also on when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, you're at minus 13% today, but in fact you should be at minus 15. So there's a little way to go. And in 2030, the expectation is that Belgium is at minus 35% of, so minus CO2. When it comes to renewable energy, Belgium today is at 9.4%, but in fact, you want it to be at 13%. On digital, the situation looks actually better. Belgium, in the overall index that we have for the digital readiness, the DAISY, Belgium is the ninth place, so above average. However, there's one pain point, and that's 5G readiness, where Belgium today is at 3%, and the average in the EU is at 21%. So that gives you also an indication where Belgium stands today. With our policies, we have 7 flagships where we actually try to help member states to define the policies that could help and push the recovery. And these 7 flagships, we call them Power Up, which is really about renewable energies. It's about Renovate, which is about buildings, and because today the existing buildings are responsible for 40% of all CO2 emissions. So there's something one can do. It's Recharge, fueling electric mobility. It's Connect, it's scale up clouds, it's modernized administration, and it's reskilling skills. So these are the 7 flagships where we give very concrete components and advice to member states to focus on their recovery plans. And that takes me to the 3rd point I want to mention, which is projects. Because without projects, you cannot invest. And when it comes to projects, the deadline is very tight because member states have exactly 3 years to plan them and commit the money from the recovery plan, and 3 years to actually spend the money. So you must be looking, all member states are looking now for projects that they can deliver in that time frame. Sometimes projects also need a business environment, a good environment to evolve in. In Belgium, for example, one of the pain points we've always mentioned in the European semester is the admin burden on companies, in particular when it comes to planning, authorizations. The share, the Bureau de Plan actually estimated the share at 1.6 of GDP. So we are helping to build these projects through industrial policy as well. For example, the Alliance on Batteries, on electromobility, the Alliance on Raw Materials, the Alliance on Hydrogen, the Alliances on plastic, where we try to bring together the whole value chain. For example, from hydrogen, the ones who produce hydrogen, the ones who transport it wherever it's needed, and the ones who use it, like, for example, steel factories or car factories. Therefore, and thereby we use our policies to help member states to develop the right projects. In a nutshell, it would not be useful to have 27 different and isolated recoveries. All the recovery plans need to leverage the single market, need to leverage the value chains in the different sectors to move on forward. And in our policies, we will make sure that technologies that allow that digital and green transformation will actually be available and to create that conversation. We need a much more collaborative approach than we've had so far between member states, but also between the European institutions and the member states in their recovery efforts to make it happen and to make sure that we're not only spending that enormous amount of money, but that we're actually investing it in the future. Next Generation EU. It's for the next generations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kerstin. Thank you for this very clear presentation on money, policy, and projects. Thank you also for concentrating on the Belgian case. And I will remember what you said about the collaborative approach, which is paramount in this. Can I now give the floor to Juan? Juan Yermo. Mr. Yermo, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, François, and welcome to everyone. A great pleasure to be here to join this webinar organized by the distinguished Egmont Institute. The OECD has been working very closely, as you know, since its foundation with the European Union and the European Commission. So really a pleasure to be here with all of you and with Kerstin Jorna in particular. Let me just basically provide a little bit of background as a reminder. I mean, we are in the worst crisis since the Second World War, if not earlier. The numbers that we're all putting forward are not encouraging for this year, and certainly we expect improvements next year. But there's so much uncertainty, and this is really the big concern that we all have, that we just don't know how quickly we're going to have the vaccine, how quickly some of the measures that have been put in place can be lifted. So caution really is still the flavor of the day. So when in times of great uncertainty, at times of war, at times of pandemics, global pandemics like today, the state has to react. It has to come forward. International collaboration, international cooperation, multilateralism has never been more needed than at times like this. So for us, when we saw the announcement from Brussels, from the European Council on the Recovery and Resilience Fund, on the European Green Deal earlier at the end of last year, I mean, all we could say is bravo, bravo, bravo to Europe, because this was exactly what was needed in Europe. Of course, the details are still to be all laid out. There's still a lot of complications, a lot of political challenges to the implementation. But this was exactly the package that we have been calling, the Secretary General of the OECD have been calling for a new Marshall Plan for some time since the crisis struck. And but even with a package just for the euro area, to give you an idea, we are projecting a decline of nearly 8% this year in GDP. There is a contraction compared to a contraction of 4.1 for G20 countries and 4.5 at the global level. So again, this is the biggest contraction since the Great Depression. As I said, the biggest crisis we've had since the Second World War in terms of our economy. Unemployment in the EU also expected to go up minimum an extra 1% and probably higher next year. There is this wonderful, of course, immediate reaction in terms of the national support measures that were very quick in many countries in responding to the crisis, in protecting citizens, but then in protecting companies, in supporting jobs through this Kurzarbeit, all these mechanisms to support employment and keep people employed during this very difficult time. But the problem is, this is, of course, all this support at some point, well, it has its limits. And in many European countries, as we all know very well, and at the European Union as a whole, we do have those constraints that we all know very well, whether you call it a debt brake, whether you call it Maastricht criteria, whatever you call them. Or, the fact of the matter is that there are restrictions, and we do have a concern that in a way the plug will be pulled too soon in terms of having the support to our economies and to employment into the new year. Why? Because of this uncertainty that we have, and because of these constraints that are inbuilt into the system. In our latest interim economic outlook in September, we made it very clear, governments, institutions, the European Union, they have to be very careful in ensuring support, fiscal support, well into the new year, in order to ensure that we don't repeat the same mistakes that we did during the global financial crisis, when, if you want, the austerity policies and fiscal contraction happened too soon, and therefore we had effectively a very slow recovery. This crisis is like nothing we've seen. We need to do everything it takes, to paraphrase a bit Mario Draghi here, in terms of our response. And the RRF is the right response. It's a European response, not only because it lends that support to and kind of frees up some space at the national level, but also it creates some degree of mutualization of the debt, but also because it's focused on effectively what we would call mission innovation, on transformational investments in the European economy. We all know the role of the market, but we all know also that some of this biggest transformation in our economies, whether it's the climate, the low carbon transition, whether it's the digital transformation, whether it's addressing inequalities and all those that are left behind in our societies, whether it's in the regions, whether it's women, whether it's the youth, where we have potentially a lost generation, or certainly a lost couple of years for many youth because of the COVID-19 crisis. We need states that are strong in the sense that are really focused on using this, as Winston Churchill would have said, never let a good crisis go to waste. And this is exactly where we are today. We are in the middle of once in a lifetime crisis, and this is the opportunity. This is a window of opportunity that governments have in order to transform their economies. How? Well, towards a more sustainable model, towards a more resilient model. We've been focused a lot on efficiencies over the last 20 years. That has been the economic model and analytical approach to economics that very much focus on perfect markets, perfect equilibrium, and obviously perfect information. We know that the reality is not like that. We know that the world is very complex, highly interconnected, that there are systemic features where a small crisis in one area can, like, the subprime, can cause a blow up in our financial system. We've had here a pandemic that has taken worldwide proportions and that is extended in time. And clearly, I think it's time for action. This kind of bold breakthrough actions that the European Union has taken, I think, is a right step. And now what we like to see is those actions, as Kerstin was saying, being actually implemented in as quick a manner as possible, but also in an effective manner with the right projects. And that's always a difficulty. How do you make sure you have the right governance in place, the right policies in place, the right people in place, in order to make sure that those projects can be, those transformational projects, those mission-oriented projects, whether it's on the digital, climate and other areas, they actually deliver results and they deliver quick wins. And that's not easy. That's not easy. And this is really where I think our collaboration between the European Union and the Commission specifically and the OECD has been so productive, because we've been working now for 3 years hand in hand. Of course, we work with DG Grow and every Director General in Brussels, but we have a very special relationship with DG Reform, which, as you know, is the arm of the Commission in charge of structural reform. And that's the area where the OECD has been very much involved in. Just over the last 2 years, for instance, we've had 85 projects with more than 22 countries, 22 EU countries, where we have gone down to the nitty-gritty issues, like Kerstin was just mentioning, administrative burdens. We've worked on administrative burdens, going through the laws, the regulations, addressing, simplifying regulations in order to facilitate market entry, in order to facilitate entrepreneurship, addressing issues of lack of competition, but also questions, of course, now with COVID, of how do you redesign your long-term care workforce, your long-term care. 85, 90% of long-term care workers are women, underpaid women, very often immigrant women, very often discriminated women. Women are also at the center of COVID more generally. They are the ones who are bearing the biggest burden in terms of family care, in terms of all the difficulties that they have with ensuring that they keep the family and the work conditions together. So there are so many angles to this question of the recovery. Finally, I would just end with really laying down really for us what are the kind of the 3 pillars of the recovery. It's about supporting and keeping that support long enough so that we don't stumble back into a major recession like we just lived. Building resilience into the system, into all systems. It's of course health systems, but it's also about resilience in supply chains. And then we go to the question of essential goods, essential pharmaceutical goods, but all the essential goods in the system, and what should be the role of the state there. But also the 3rd pillar, which is about transformation. And yes, we need strong companies, we need a strong, vibrant private sector, but we also need a clear guidance from state and state-supported investment that allows us to make those nationwide and global transformations that what the market on its own is just not going to deliver, because they're not pricing in those externalities, because they're not taking into consideration both the positive and the negative aspects of their action. And I'll leave it there, and of course happy to take further questions.
Thank you very much, Juan, for this very clear expose in which you mentioned your positive attitude towards the recovery plan. The fact, an opinion you share with the IMF, not pull the plug too soon, and third, the technical help you can provide to member states for support, resilience, and transformation. Thank you very much. Before giving the floor to Olivier, I would like to reiterate the possibility for participants to put questions in written through the chat box, and Guillaume will send it to me. Please do not hesitate to ask your questions already now. Olivier, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, François, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm extremely delighted to attend this session. Thank you very much to Egmont Institute for organizing this and inviting me. And I have to apologize on behalf of our CEO, Peter Timmermans, who had another unexpected meeting today. So I will maybe make some general remarks and comments on the topic of today, and then I will maybe focus on 4 priorities as regards Belgium. So maybe as a matter of introduction, our members, FAP, represents 40 sectorial associations active in the industry and services, and our members reacted very positively as regards the recovery plan and the RRF. As you may know, Belgium was really hit by the first COVID move. The activity in Belgium during the 2nd quarter was 15% lower than the 2nd quarter of last year. So a very big impact on the Belgian economy. So Belgium clearly needs a strong recovery plan, as rightly stated in the program of the new federal government. And we believe that the EU recovery plan and RFF can clearly contribute to these objectives. So it's for us a great opportunity, and neither Belgium nor Europe can miss the train of this opportunity. We also very much welcome the fact that the strategy is based on two pillars: investment, of course, very needed. I will come back on this later on, but also structural reforms. And we believe that the combination of these two pillars, investment and structural reforms in the framework of the European semester, can really contribute to the recovery and the improvement of the resilience, but also the competitiveness of the Belgium and the European companies. Maybe a short word as regards resilience and the debate about open strategic autonomy. We make a clear distinction between the resilience of the private sector and the global supply chains and the resilience of the member states and the authorities. We believe that the resilience of the private sector is first in the hands of the private sector. It's up to them to reinforce it. And as regards the resilience of the authorities, we hope that the debate will be a fact-based debate, not based on assumptions, but based on evidences, and that Europe, of course, will remain open for trade and investment and will not fall into a kind of protectionist approach. Then maybe some priorities from our side for the future. So I will make a distinction between short-term and mid-term. As regards the short term, of course, the very first priority is to fight the second wave of COVID. The numbers in Belgium are very bad at the moment. So this is, of course, the key priority, but while maintaining the economy and the schools open, in order to avoid what happened during the first wave. Going back to what happened during the first wave would have, again, very negative consequences, not only for companies, but for the whole Belgium society and for the recovery on the long term. So really fighting COVID while maintaining the economy and the schools open is a key priority. Second priority is, and OECD referred to this, is to keep supporting the companies. So we really ask the prolongation of the support measures. I refer to unemployment schemes, liquidities for the companies, risk capital reduction, and so on and so forth, because we calculated that 16% of LC companies before COVID crisis are now confronted with huge financial problems. They were LC before the COVID crisis, and they have now real big problems concerning the liquidities. So we really hope the authorities will keep supporting the companies. Don't forget that within less than 80 days, the companies will be confronted with the real impact of Brexit. So managing COVID and Brexit will really not be easy for the companies. So our second priority is continuation of the support measures. Then when we look at the midterm, there is a real need for a major investment plan in Belgium, and we very much welcome the ambitions of the new federal government on this topic. And here, of course, the Next Generation EU and RRF can really contribute to this plan. At FEB, we believe that the priority should be given to what we call the productive investments. I mean, investments with real and concrete and positive impact on the economy and on the resilience of our country. And let me maybe give you 3 examples of areas where we believe investment should take place. First, energy and energy efficiency, as it has already been mentioned. Our second topic is mobility and multimodal mobility solutions. And our third topic is the digital agenda and the e-government, the digitalization of the public authorities. And I fully agree with what the Commission just mentioned about the administrative burden in Belgium, the length to get a permit, for example. So we hope we can also improve these to facilitate these productive investments. And actually, we got a lot of reactions by our members on the kind of projects that they could support and they could propose. They have good projects that fit with the 2 mainstreams, the Green Deal and the digital agenda, which also can fit with the 7 flagships that were mentioned. So, but they have also lots of questions as regards, for example, the involvement of the private sector in the design of the Belgium Recovery and Resilience Plan. So in the coming weeks, together with the sectors, we will try to work on a list of relevant projects from the private sector, and we would be extremely delighted to cooperate with the authorities, in particular with Mr. Thomas Dermine, on these, to see how these projects coming from the private sector could find a place in the future Belgium National Recovery and Resilience Plan. And my fourth priority, as I mentioned in my short introduction, concerns the structural reforms. As I said, we believe that the strategy must be based on investment for sure, but also structural reforms. So, of course, you can imagine we have a long list of priorities on this matter at FEB. But for example, the flexibility of the labor market should also be improved in line with the recommendations, the country-specific recommendations of the Commission for years addressed to Belgium. So fighting COVID, keeping economy and schools open, keep supporting companies, productive investments, and structural reforms are some of our priorities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Olivier, for this introduction. And I will recall that what you said about how do you see the recovery plan focusing on investment, structural reform, and competitiveness. I mean, you made clear what your priorities were, and you also mentioned the problems that which might arise with the so-called dum-dum bullet Brexit plus COVID, which may affect Belgium in the near future. Thank you very much. I will now give the floor to Monsieur Thomas Dermine. Thank you, Mr. Secretary of State, for being with us. Could you take the floor? The floor is yours.
Thank you, François, and thanks to all of you who are participating in this workshop. And it's a great opportunity to share some thoughts about how we see the process from the Belgian side and to react to some of the comments that have been made previously. First of all, I would like to start with a small story. I know that everybody loves a Belgian story, so I will not resist to share one with you. About 3 years ago, the government of Charles Michel, who is also well known in the European area for the moment, started to work on a major investment plan. It was a very ambitious investment plan. And actually, it was quite a good investment plan. Olivier, I guess you have followed this work by the government of Charles Michel. The priorities of the investment plans were really the good ones. And it's no surprise that actually, if you read today what the Commission is proposing, the big orientations and the guiding principles of the plan that was laid out by Charles Michel 3 years ago was quite aligned with the guidelines of the Commission today. The big problem is that once the design of the plan was done, came the big question, how do we finance it? And how do we implement it? And these two big questions have remained unanswered. So today, we are 3 years down the road, and the world has changed. And to those who believe that nothing can change, that to those who are cynical about the fact that nothing can change in policy and that the European institution will never change, I invite them to witness the whole mindset change that has been done over the last 2 years. Because now we are 2 years down the road and we are working together with the private sector, we are working together with the European Commission on how to finance this kind of big investments and how to deliver in a very short time frame these kind of investments. So this Belgian story actually illustrates another side of this entire COVID episode. This COVID episode can and is, of course, a huge drama, a drama for the person who suffers from the disease, a drama for the economy, but it can also be a catalyst to accelerate transition in a new economy, which is low carbon and very much more digital based. And that's a bit the challenge of our generation and the challenge of the Commission and the challenge of all the governments in the member state is, what do you want to make out of this COVID episode? Do you want to make it a breaking point because it's a big challenge for democracies, it's a big challenge for governments, or do you want to make it, and do you want to be remembered as the ones who have taken their responsibility to use this big challenge as a way to accelerate investments, as a way to accelerate transition into low carbon and digital-based economy? And this is really the ambition of this government for Belgium. Is the first priority, and I fully agree with Olivier, should be to fight the disease and all the consequences in the short term of the disease. But then let's make it a big breaking point to accelerate the transition, and let's make all the full use of the instruments at national level, at European level, to accelerate the transition. And I think it's a bit the same for the industrial strategy of the Commission. I mean, when it was released a bit less than a year ago, it was a strategy. Now with the RRF, it's more than a strategy. It's a strategy with a time plan and with funds linked to it. And that's the momentum that we should seize in all the member state governments. That was my first point. The second point is about what should we do as a government. I think that this economic shock is a supply shock. And so the best recovery strategy that we should have in the next few months is basically preventing the supply to collapse, is making everything to avoid a second lockdown, to avoid to keep as many businesses open as possible, and to avoid to have one side effect on the supply. It does not mean that in parallel we should not work on the recovery, even though the timing of the recovery plan is still uncertain, because it's linked to the end of the pandemic and mostly to the release of the vaccine. And that's what we do also in the government. We do everything as fast as we can to be ready with the recovery plan and to be able to start it as soon as the conditions are ready in terms of health policy. The second question that was asked to me is about how do we intend to do it within the new Belgian government. It's not a secret to anybody that we are currently late in Belgium. Most of the European member states have already started to work on their plan. Some countries like France or Germany have already released some elements of their recovery plans. Belgian politics, it's always a bit hectic, so we took some time to have a new government. But now we have one, and we have a specific Secretary of State, which is responsible to be the single point of contact for the Commission on the RRF. And that's me, and we are fully committed to it. And though that's a strong message to Europe, and that's a strong message to all the social partners, including FEB, Olivier, that we are fully committed to work on this plan and to make it an ambitious and successful story for Belgium. In terms of policy, to use the structure of Kerstin, I think that in the accord de gouvernement, so in the agreement of the government, which is the basis for the functioning of the government in the next 4 years, we have laid out a few very ambitious targets that are going in the right direction and in the direction of the Commission in terms of budgetary management, in terms of digital policies, in terms of a very ambitious plan to cut our carbon emission and respect the targets towards 2030 and 2050. And I believe we are a very committed team. We are facing very deep challenges with managing the health crisis, but our captain is strong, our team is fully committed, and we will go through the bad weather. In terms of projects, which was the second level of your speech, Kerstin, I think the idea is indeed to work on very productive investment, Olivier, and I don't know a lot of governments who have committed to work on non-productive investments, but so we will work on productive investments, and what we will do foremost is try to avoid unproductive investment, even though it's sometimes hard to know ex ante how to best direct investment, but we will work on it. And the best way to do it is to do it in working in a very open manner with the key players and private businesses that you represent, Oliver, are part of the equation. So our doors are fully open to suggestions. The ambition is to respect fully the deadlines imposed by the Commission, and we will start in the next few days with a very open processes of work groups to select the projects and to be able to prioritize those projects based on very clear criteria. Criteria being on the, I would say, the maturity of the projects, the ability to deliver those projects in a very short time frame. The second one is the multiplicator effect. If the idea is to work on the recovery, we should maximize the Keynesian effect of the recovery, and we have tools and models to assess the impact of this multiplicator effect. And the third one is, of course, whether it's aligned with the priorities of the government and the Commission. So mostly on the digital side and the green side of the investments. And the idea, and I would like to end with it, is really to base our process on three key values. The first one is the transversality. For those who don't know Belgium, it's always a bit of a challenge in Belgium because we have to, even though we are a small country, we need to work together with the regional level, the federal level, but also the communities. And so it's always a lot of stakeholder management to animate this kind of processes, but we will try to work in a transversal manner, and to avoid, which is typical in Belgium, is to discuss first where should the money go, instead of starting from the projects and assessing first the projects and then deciding on how you allocate the money between the different level of the country. The second principle is inclusiveness. We will try to work with the social partner. I mentioned it to Olivier, but I mean, we believe that a bottom-up approach can be part of it, and the ones who know best what are the best productive investment, to use the language of Olivier, are mostly the social partners. So we will work with social partners. And the third one is transparency. So we know it's also a challenging time for democracy. We know citizens are in doubt of the capacity of the political level to face the big challenges of our generation. So we will share as much as we can the processes that we will follow and the prioritization criteria that we used to make the plan and draft it. And so now au travail.
Mm-hmm. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, Thomas, for this presentation. Your assessment on what happened with the so-called Michel investment plan, the emphasis you put on the importance of supply chains on supply side, and how you intend to coordinate the work between all the Belgian stakeholders. Before going to the questions, one thing strikes me with the interventions I heard so far is the timing issue. Because Kerstin was speaking about 3 years to plan, 3 years to invest. You yourself, Thomas, said we are a little bit late. I mean, obviously there is an issue here. The timing, I believe, for introducing projects started on the 15th October and will end somewhere at the end of March. but there are many reasons why we tend to think that this will be difficult to realize. What happens if, because the money is needed and the projects are needed in 2021, not in 2022. So that would be my first question, but then I will pass the word to Guillaume, who has received, I see, quite a lot of demand from the floor.
Indeed, many thanks, François. And indeed, there's quite a lot of interest and there are a lot of questions. So please allow me to summarize or to group several questions. So for example, Marta Pilati from the European Policy Center, a researcher there who is really working on this issue and is an expert on this issue, is asking, she's arguing that these national recovery plans are highly centralized structured. So with a lot of focus or putting the implementation in the hands of national governments. So she's asking which measures are in place to ensure that investments are also targeted to the regions within the members. So this is a general question, I think, for Kerstin at the EU level, but several other participants are also asking how this would work at the Belgium level. So how the National Recovery Plan would then be reimbursed at intra-federal level, involving both the federal level and the region. So that's the second question linked to that. And the third question, one participant is asking, actually in Belgium, who is now really actually in charge of the National Recovery Plan? Is it under the cabinet of Monsieur Dermine, or what is also the relation with the office of the Prime Minister? So I will start with these three questions.
Thank you very much, Guillaume. Kerstin, maybe the floor is yours.
Yeah, sorry, I had to unmute. Well, we don't give the money, actually. This is the very special thing, how it works. This is not EU budget. This is money that the EU kind of collects on the markets and then gives to member states. 5.1 billion to Belgium, which is an equivalent of today's 1.12 of GDP. So that's a big sum. And just to describe the challenge of spending it, it would be something like almost 200% of the structural funds allocation that member states, that Belgium has had. So you would need to handle, on all stakeholders would need to handle a lot more money in the projects in these 3+3 years. We don't, I mean, the governance is such that it's for the member states to decide between central level where the projects go. This is really the decision is there. Of course, there is also a bit of EU budget that we have, the structural funds and regional funds we have. We have Horizon, just to name the big parts, which can actually come in support of projects that member states also develop through their recovery plans. And that's where I think there will be a discussion about, you know, spending and investing the money across the country. But there is no direct right for the Commission to impose anything on that. Also, the deadlines, they are not imposed by us. They are actually still under discussion. Because the regulation that forms the basis for this is still under discussion with the governments at the moment. So it's a bit provisional. But what we think is that we said that we have given all the guidance that, and we're continuing to give guidance on how to best to draft the recovery plans. And of course, we've started a dialogue with all the member states that are interested to discuss, you know, how they would, what building blocks they would need in their plans, and where we know that other member states have similar building blocks. So can we connect it? Hydrogen is an example. Or where member states would like to know more, they want to go into a policy and investment where they don't have enough experience yet, and then they would like to understand a bit better, for example, on common charging and electromobility, which in some countries is really a completely new feature.
Thank you very much, Kerstin. Maybe the tricky question on who is in charge. Thomas, would you repeat what you already said? Or?
No, for sure. A few comments on the question. Yes, in Belgium we are late, but we are not too late. The bad news is that we started only a few weeks ago. Whereas the other member states have started already since earlier this year. The good news is that we don't start from zero, and actually we will make the full use of regional projects that are already drafted at the Flemish side, but also in Brussels and in Wallonia. And we will also make the full use of the Charles Michel investment plan, actually, because some of the projects were very good and some very interesting works has been done 2 years ago. So it needs, of course, to be updated, but we don't start from a blank sheet, and we would be stupid to start from a blank sheet. So the deadlines imposed by the Commission are, of course, challenging, but not unrealistic, and we will work full steam ahead to comply with those deadlines. It has been made on the question of ownership. It has been communicated by the Commission, and Kerstin, correct me if I'm wrong, but that the national level should be in charge of coordinating the effort, and that there should be only one plan per member state. And ideally, it should be one integrated plan, no matter how divided or how complicated the internal structure of the country is. So the idea is to draft one single plan and not the bundle of 4 different plans. And that's the process that we will coordinate in the next few weeks and few months to arrive with one single plan. Who is in charge in the government? I think this is a collective duty of the government. And the whole government, under the leadership of the Prime Minister Alexander De Croo, is in charge of this plan. And we will have projects that will fall under the responsibility of different ministers. We will have projects in digital field who are under the charge of the Minister for the Digital Agenda. We will have projects in mobility under charge of the Minister of Mobility, but it's a collective projects of the government. The coordination of the entire process and the assembling process of the different projects and in one single plan will be under my responsibility as a Secretary of State for relance, for recovery. But as I said, the role we will play is to coordinate the entire process, which is a collective process of the government with many ministers involved, because this project of recovery is a collective duty of our government for the next few years.
Thank you very much, Thomas. I don't know if Juan or Olivier want to come in, but if this is not the case, I will give the floor.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please, Juan.
Thank you. Just to comment, I think we shouldn't forget the other leg of the whole recovery and transformation initiative, which is the structural reform. I think Olivier referred to it. I think this is obviously a key pillar where obviously the investments also have to be targeted to address the issues or challenges at the regional level, at the local level, and the inequalities that have been building over the last 2 decades between the regions. This is obviously a critical part of any national recovery and resilience fund. But let's not forget also the whole part on reforming administrations, on reforming labor markets, but also addressing changes at the regional, at the local level. And that's something that is part of the RRF, but it's also part of the other instrument that the Commission has, which is the Technical Support Initiative. And there, on the TSI, again, just to come back to the OECD, because I happen to work there, we've been working very closely with Belgium, and maybe Thomas, already he knows this. For instance, now we have 3 specific projects which are actually targeted at one at the local level on mobility, specifically on developing innovative mobility solutions in the Brussels capital region. We have another one which is on improving the recognition of skills amongst the underprivileged, the low-skilled populations in the Wallonia region. And also we have a broader work at the OECD, which is about improving the indicators at the regional and local level, which is always a big problem. I mean, you need to ultimately monitor those policies, monitor those investments, and sometimes the systems that are built in countries are actually not allowing an effective oversight of the impact of some of these projects. So that's we're building really a lot into the capacity, improving the capacity by working with this instrument of the European Commission, the TSI. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juan. Olivier, you want to say something? Otherwise, we go to the questions.
No, thank you very much. Thank you very much also, Mr. Dermine, for your very interesting comments and suggestion and your invitation to the social partners. Very much appreciated. Indeed, we were involved in the basic analysis and preparatory work for the strategic investment plan a couple of years ago, and it's an excellent basis indeed for the future, because we believe that, of course, there will only be one key opportunity as these to make the right investments. And of course, and I guess that the Commission will be very clear and hard on this. The idea is not to finance normal expenditures by the governments, but really to invest in new projects with a real impact on the resilience and the recovery. And that's also how did we look at these. And then I see also the chat and a question asked by a colleague from Agoria. We indeed also support, as the Commission mentioned, the collective potential impact of projects, referring, for example, to key alliances or projects like these. We believe indeed that Belgium must also play even a better and a bigger role in these key alliances, like the one for the batteries or hydrogen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olivier. Guillaume, do you have any more questions for us? And another set of questions, please. Thanks.
Indeed, we have still a lot of questions, and thank you, Olivier, for already addressing some of them that you have picked up in the chat box. For example, Monsieur Laurent Hellebout from Agoria is asking how and to what extent Belgium is considering these 7 flagships that national recovery plans need to address in any case. So these 7 flagships identified by the Commission in September, just to sum them up: power up, renovate, recharge and refuel, connect, modernize, scale up. So these criteria or this matrix could be useful, but the question is to what extent the Belgian government is addressing them or is using them as a template in its recovery plan. A second question from Chiara Bari from Sandbeck Think Tank is that member states recovery plans are supposed to contribute to the priorities identified in the European semester, but will there be any criteria to exclude certain kinds of investments that are not compatible with European Green Deal? For example, she's flagging the debate in the European Parliament to exclude financing for fossil fuels. So maybe we start with these 2 questions, which are already quite broad in nature.
Thank you very much, Guillaume. Maybe we'll start with the criteria for excluding some investment in certain sectors. Kerstin, what can you tell us about this?
I can tell you that the eligibility for financing under the RRF will depend from the regulation that's still being in discussion. What is clear, and the heads of state, the leaders also agreed on, is that 37% of the money should be used for, of the whole sum should be used for green investment and 20% for digital, which also gives a kind of direction. We've also announced that when we issue bonds for this sum, 30% of it will be green bonds, actually. So which means then that green investment has to kind of back up this promise to the investors.
Thank you very much. On the 7 flagships, I don't know if Thomas or Olivier or even one who wants to chip in.
Yeah, maybe. Yes, we do intend to use it as a way to structure our reasoning and our answers. And I think that given the very time-sensitive nature of the drafting process, the Commission and thanks to the person working on it in the Commission is providing the member states guidelines and templates on how to draft the plan. And I think it's very useful to make sure that everyone use a very small amount of time ahead of us in the most efficient way. And yes, I see a question by Roland, who was asking why the Fédération des Entreprises de Belgique was here and not the trade unions. And I believe actually that when we mention, when I mentioned in my answers that we would open the process to social partners, I use the term social partners on purpose, and it includes, of course, the two sides of the equation. The enterprises and the unions of workers, and I think that this equilibrium is very important in the drafting process.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Just on that very point, I saw the remark. It's a very good remark. Of course, from the Egmont perspective, we will invite the social partners. The problem was technically, with more than 4 panelists, it was difficult, but there will be other occasions with other partners, and stakeholders will be, of course, invited by Egmont. Does anyone have any additional answer to the 2 questions by Guillaume?
If I may,
yes,
François,
please.
Just another comment on what Kerstin said. I mean, I understand the whole regulation, the details are being laid out, but I think from an OECD perspective, clearly, the whole package, any recovery package, any plan is aligned with climate goals, with the Paris Agreement, with the climate emissions goals, with environmental goals, the biodiversity goals, and you know that should apply across the whole plan. I mean, I think it's very good that there's a dedicated 37%, as you put it. This is excellent, because that's kind of give that impetus to renewable energy, to the energy efficiency, and all the mobility, renewable mobility, and all the aspects of the green low carbon transition. But let's not forget, I mean, there is still a lot of inconsistency in our policies. I mean, we recently calculated with the International Energy Agency the total amount of subsidies to fossil fuels today in the 77 biggest economies. It approaches 500 billion euros annually. I mean, this is massive. This is 3 times the whole of the overseas development assistance aid to developing countries. So, and we know that more than 70% of carbon emissions are not priced, and only 10% are priced at the minimum 30 euros per ton price that you need in order to get just to the 2 degrees, you know, let alone the 1.5. So I think, you know, obviously it's been very difficult to get to the RF. There's been a lot of political compromises, but you know, you can count on the OECD to try to encourage all our members, and of course the European Union also, to keep raising the bar in order to align its very ambitious climate policies and its very ambitious emissions goals, which have just been again raised. And I think this is really welcome, giving a very strong signal to the rest of the world. And we hope everyone else would follow the European ambition in that regard. But I think we need to look at the overall policy package, and not just the RRF plans themselves and the national recovery plans themselves. This is my main message.
Thank you very much.
Maybe, François, if I may, just two comments. Now, I think indeed time and deadlines are key. So the guidance from the Commission is very much appreciated. For example, we will use the 7 flagships as a kind of matrix while collecting suggestions from our sectors. But indeed, the timing is really sharp, and the guidance is really needed. Also to guarantee a kind of coherent approach among the member states to be sure that the money is well spent. And then maybe to a comment, or maybe a question, if I may, to Mr. Dermine. Of course, we know that 5 billion euros as subsidies for Belgium, it's a huge number of money. But on the other hand, we also know that it will not be enough to finance all the projects. So I guess that the Belgian authorities will also mobilize all the funds, also work together with the European Investment Bank, for example, to finance all the projects. But I had also a question, what about public-private partnerships? Do you envisage maybe because the government cannot finance everything, do you see a role for private investors in these projects? Thank you.
Thomas, you want to answer that?
Oh yeah, for sure. No, you're totally right, Olivier. And if I look at the last 15 years only, the level of public investment rate of Belgium has been always significantly lower than the European average. And if we add up each year the negative difference that we have with the European average, it adds up to 70 billions of euro. So 5 billions is of course a lot of money, but it's only a small share of the retard that we have in terms of public investment. So the challenge, and actually the recovery plan that we draft right now, is bigger than what we will submit to the Commission. And a significant share of the funding will come from the RRF, but the idea is to draft a plan which is larger than the part that we will submit to the EU. And of course, and we will need to work together with the private sector, with other institutions, with national funding schemes to fund projects outside of the RRF funding. But you are fully right that we need to be more ambitious than the funding we will get from the EU.
Thank you very much. Yes, Kerstin, please.
Sorry. When it comes to going beyond the public money purse, I just want to highlight the importance of the taxonomy rules that we have for private investment into sustainable investment. It's the first and only standard worldwide that there is for sustainable investment, and it responds to a huge demand on the part of investors actually to be assured that when they want to do green, they can do green or sustainable. And it has been taken up in a very strong way by private investors, and it has made Europe really a destination for investment into sustainable in the broad sense. And we should embrace that policy. And that's where it comes back to my point about projects. Projects, they are brought to you by private investors who just, they need the last mile to help the public money, to help them to take, the risk when it's very early stage, or to help address the market, the rollout issue, the scale-up issue. But in that way, we will be able, with the taxonomy and the eligibility criteria for the RRF, we will be able to mobilize a huge amount of investment, which is more than just in the RRF. And that's where we should all aim. And that's why it's so important to have good projects as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kerstin. I see that our time is up. I'm a little bit embarrassed because there are many questions out there. I can only promise that there will be other opportunities to have a discussion on this crucial issue. So maybe I'd like to conclude by a few remarks, if you allow me. I think I will make 4 remarks. I will start by maybe a philosophical consideration. I mean, listening to the conversation we had, it reminded me of Blaise Pascal's wager, Le Paris de Blaise Pascal. It seems that by betting on Europe's new industrial policy to ensure resilience and recovery, Europeans are making a rational choice. If a full recovery is not possible, at least the efforts undertaken will limit the collateral damages of our present economic model. And if a full recovery is achieved, then the EU and its member states will receive infinite gains, very similar to the wager, or Pascal's wager. My second consideration is more pragmatic. I think the conversation we just had proved the strategic importance of cooperation and collaboration within member states, between member states and EU institutions, but also between member states and economic institutions outside Europe. And obviously, what we need is an integrated approach to meet the challenges ahead. My third point is Belgium. I think the Belgian case will probably be a test case for the EU. First of all, because our country is a mature industrial country with a market economy mainly driven by SMEs. And second, maybe because our country is a federal state with a very complex coordination system between the federal and regional level. And in that way, Belgium is in fact a little bit sort of a mini Europe. And my fourth closing comment is about Egmont, our Egmont Institute. This is the first webinar of its kind, but of course we will continue in the Europe tip of Egmont to follow very closely developments linked to the recovery strategy. As a very neutral platform, we are open for any contacts and exchanges, and I will once again underline that I will take into account some of the comments made by participants concerning the composition of the panel. There are many other stakeholders out there, and they will get their chance, I promise you. Thank you very much for participating. Thank you very much to all those I do not see. I hope this was interesting for you, and I hope to see you and to talk to you again in other circumstances. Have a nice afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Egmont.